My father died. But I came to pay his debt.
He was running. Not the running of a man being chased by something he can see. The other kind. The kind where every shadow is a shape, and every shape is a reason to move faster, and the body has already decided that thinking is a luxury it can no longer afford. Cord Dillman was 34 years old and had survived 8 years of dangerous work across 3 territories by being smarter than the situations he walked into. He was not smart right now. He was scared, which is a different thing entirely, and he was running north through the dark streets of Grayfield, Kansas, away from a boarding house door and toward whatever open road would take him furthest from what was behind him. He made it 40 yards before he heard his name. The voice was a woman's, flat, precise, no anger in it, which was somehow worse than anger. He stopped. Every part of him that had kept him alive for 8 years told him to keep running. He turned around anyway. She hadn't moved. She was standing in the lamplight at the far end of the street, 15 feet from where he'd been standing, now 55 feet away, a shape in the dark. A woman he'd never seen before tonight. A woman who had found him, which meant she'd been looking, which meant she knew. He looked at the distance between them. Too far, he thought. She can't make that shot. Not in this light. Not with a handgun. My father died, she said. Her voice carried clean and cold through the Kansas winter air. But I came to pay his debt. She drew. Cord Dillman had one more thought after that. Whether it was regret or recognition, or simply the involuntary firing of a brain that hadn't caught up to what was happening. I don't know. He didn't have time to finish it. I've been carrying this story for a long time. Longer than most. It doesn't fit neatly into anything I know how to call it. It isn't quite justice. It isn't quite revenge. It's something older than both of those words. Something that was moving long before Ruth Calloway picked up a gun. Something that started the way most terrible things start. With paperwork. Thomas Calloway had fought in the war. Not the version the newspapers printed afterward. The one with clean uniforms and clear purposes. The real one. The one that lasted 4 years and smelled like mud and gangrene and left men with things in their eyes that weren't there before they went in. Thomas had served as a quartermaster, not a rifleman, not a soldier who fired at other men across open fields. The man who kept the supplies moving, who knew where everything was and what everything cost and how long it would last. The shoulder came from a supply wagon that lost a wheel on a Missouri road in 1863 and came down on the wrong side of him. He came home to Kansas in 1865 with that bad shoulder, a small parcel of land 30 miles east of Dodge City, and a daughter who was 17 years old and had been raised by her aunt while he was gone. Ruth didn't know him when he came back. She learned him slowly, the way you learn a new language, one word at a time, one morning at a time, until one day you realize you've been thinking in it without noticing. What Thomas taught her in those years on the Calloway land was this. The land was everything. The land didn't lie. The land didn't leave. And a woman alone in Kansas needed to know 2 things: how to work the land and how to protect it. He taught her to shoot when she was 20, not for sport, not for show, with the gravity of a man who had seen enough of the world to know what waited in it for a woman alone. By the time she was 23, Ruth Calloway could put 3 rounds in a grouping the size of a man's fist at 40 yards. Thomas Calloway watched her do it one October afternoon and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. Don't ever let anybody tell you that's not a lady's skill." Neither of them knew, standing in that field on that October afternoon, what that skill was going to cost her to use, or what it was going to save. The debt started small. Most debts do. In the winter of 1870, A drought hit the eastern Kansas flatlands and didn't let go until the following spring. Thomas Calloway lost a season's crop. Not unusual. Half the farms in the county lost the same. But Thomas was older now, his shoulder worse than it had been, and the reserves he'd spent years building had been smaller than he'd let Ruth believe. He went to the Merchants Bank of Grayfield. The man behind the desk was named Victor Hale. Victor Hale was 53 years old, attended First Methodist every Sunday without fail, contributed generously to the church restoration fund, and had a handshake that was warm and a smile that was practiced, and a loan agreement that was neither. The interest rate was printed in language that required a lawyer to interpret, which Thomas Calloway was not, and the repayment terms were structured in a way that a drought year made nearly impossible to meet. Thomas signed anyway, because the alternative was losing the land, and the land was everything. He made the payments for 2 years. Missed one in the spring of 1872, when the seed cost more than expected and the cattle prices dropped at market. Missed another in the fall when the well needed repair. Victor Hale was patient. Victor Hale was understanding. Victor Hale sent a letter in January of 1873 that was warm and regretful and informed Thomas Calloway that the bank would require full settlement of the outstanding balance, plus accumulated interest, within 60 days, or legal proceedings would commence to reclaim the property as collateral. The full balance was more than Thomas Calloway had seen in one place in his life. He wrote back. He asked for more time. Victor Hale did not respond to that letter. What he did instead, 2 weeks later, was hire Cord Dillman. Cord Dillman was not a complicated man. He was 34 years old, 6 feet and 1 inch tall, and had the quality of a man who fills a doorway without trying. Not from size alone, but from something in the way he occupied space, like the room had already decided to give him more of it than he'd asked for. He'd been doing this particular kind of work, the kind that doesn't have a clean name, for 8 years across Texas, Missouri, and now Kansas. His hands were the thing you noticed first. Big, still, the hands of a man who doesn't gesture when he talks because he's learned that stillness is its own kind of message. He was not cruel in the way that some men in his profession were cruel. He didn't enjoy it. He was simply very good at it, and had long ago stopped asking questions about the people who hired him or the people he was hired to visit. Victor Hale's instructions were simple. Go to the Calloway property, make clear that the debt was real and the timeline was firm, and ensure that Thomas Calloway understood the consequences. Cord Dillman rode out on a Tuesday morning in February. Thomas Calloway was alone on the property. Ruth had gone to town for supplies. A 2-hour ride each way. A full day's errand. Cord Dillman knew this. He'd been watching the property for 2 days before he rode in. What happened next is not something I can describe with any pleasure. Thomas Calloway was 61 years old. His bad shoulder had gotten worse in the cold winters. He was not a small man, and he was not a weak man, but he was one man, alone, against someone 30 years younger who did this for a living. Cord Dillman beat him with methodical efficiency. Not to kill him. That wasn't the instruction. To deliver a message, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that a man carries in his body for however long his body lasts. He left Thomas Calloway on the floor of his own kitchen and rode back to Grayfield. He collected his fee from Victor Hale the following morning. Ruth found her father when she returned from town that evening. The kitchen floor, the cold. I won't tell you what she felt in that moment, because I don't have the right words for it, and I don't think the right words exist. Some things don't have language. They just have weight. She got him to his bed. She sent for the doctor from the nearest town, a 12-mile ride in the dark, which she did without hesitation. The doctor came. He did what he could. Thomas Calloway held on for 11 days. On the 12th morning, just before the light changed from black to gray, he died. Ruth was holding his hand when it happened. She sat with him for a long time after. Then she did nothing for 3 days. This is the part nobody talks about. The days between the grief and the decision. The body refuses to move, and the mind refuses to stop. She sat in the kitchen where she'd found him. She didn't eat much. She didn't sleep through a single night. She sat with the specific paralysis of a woman who has been trained her whole life to act and has temporarily lost the ability to identify what action means. On the 4th morning, she stood up, went outside, looked at the land her father had spent years protecting. Then she came back inside, sat down at the table beside the fireplace with a piece of paper and a pen, and wrote down 2 names: Cord Dillman, Victor Hale. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went to bed, because what came next required rest, and rest required discipline, and discipline was the one thing grief could not touch if you didn't let it. She spent 3 weeks after the funeral doing what needed doing. She sold the cattle, what remained of them. She sold the farm equipment, piece by piece, to neighbors who paid fair prices because they'd known Thomas Calloway and felt the obligation of decent people. She sold everything in the house that wasn't nailed down, and several things that were. She did not sell the land. Not because she intended to keep it, because selling the land meant paying the debt, and paying the debt meant Victor Hale won, and Victor Hale was the second name on the folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. What she had when she was done was enough money. She also had her father's Colt Army revolver, the one he'd carried through 4 years of war, the one he'd used to teach her to shoot, the one that had sat in the drawer beside his bed for years because his shoulder wouldn't let him lift it comfortably anymore. She cleaned it. She loaded it. She put it on her hip in a holster she'd had made in town by a leather worker who didn't ask questions. Then she rode toward Grayfield. I want to stop here for a moment, because what Ruth Calloway did in the weeks that followed was not legal. It was not sanctioned by any court or law. The law was not going to help Ruth Calloway. The law, in Grayfield, Kansas, in the winter of 1873, was part of the same architecture that had killed her father. The irony is that Ruth Calloway, who had every right to trust nothing about the law, ended up using it better than anyone. That's a woman who understood the difference between the law as it was written and the law as it was used, and decided to pick up the first one as a weapon. But that comes later. Before I get there, I want to know who's listening to this. Drop it in the comments. I read every one. She found Cord Dillman in Grayfield on a Thursday afternoon. Not immediately. She spent 2 days watching. She learned his patterns, where he drank, when he slept, the route he took between the saloon on Front Street and the boarding house 3 blocks north. She also learned he wasn't alone. 2 men ran with him, Akers and Webb. Where Cord went, they went. They ate together, drank together, occupied the same corner table at the saloon every evening from 6 until the bottle ran out. Ruth watched them for 2 days and understood that she couldn't take all 3 at once. She was good. She knew she was good. But good and reckless are 2 different things, and her father hadn't raised her to be reckless. She waited. On the second night, Akers left the saloon early. A cough he'd been fighting all week had gotten worse. Webb fell asleep at the table around 10, his head on his folded arms, the way a man sleeps who has been drinking since afternoon. Cord Dillman left alone. You already know what happened next. You were there at the beginning. 55 feet of Kansas night. A shot that covered the distance. Akers and Webb were gone from Grayfield by morning. Word travels fast in small towns. The word that moved through Grayfield that Thursday night was simple and strange and didn't have a clean explanation. Cord Dillman was dead in the North Street. One shot, 55 feet, dark. Nobody saw who fired it. Ruth Calloway was already 2 miles south of Grayfield, riding at a steady pace when the body was found. She had one name left on the folded piece of paper. Victor Hale was harder. Not because he was dangerous. Victor Hale had never held a gun in his life and had always paid other people. He was harder because he was protected by structure. By the bank building on Main Street with its solid doors and its 2 armed guards hired after Cord Dillman's death sent a message through Grayfield that something unusual was moving toward him. By the sheriff of Grayfield, a man named Pratt. Ruth spent a week in Grayfield watching. She moved carefully. She changed where she slept every 2 nights. She studied the structure the way her father had taught her to read land, looking for what wasn't there, not what was. Every structure has gaps. Victor Hale was a man of habit. Routine is the best armor a guilty man has. Victor Hale arrived at the bank at 8 every morning and left at 6 every evening. He took lunch at the hotel dining room on Main Street every day at noon. The same table, the same meal, the same 12-minute walk. The gap was Sunday morning. The guards stayed at the bank. The sheriff was at the Baptist congregation across town. The lawyer didn't work Sundays. On the 3rd Sunday of March, 1873, Victor Hale walked out of First Methodist Church of Grayfield, shaking hands with the pastor, nodding to neighbors. Ruth Calloway was waiting across the street, not with a gun drawn, sitting on the steps of the dry goods store opposite the church, dressed in deliberately ordinary clothes. A woman waiting for something. Nothing unusual. Victor Hale saw her when he reached the bottom of the church steps. He didn't recognize her immediately. Thomas was just a name in a ledger, a number in a column. Victor Hale had never needed to know the daughter. Then he saw her eyes, and he understood. He turned to walk in the other direction. "Mr. Hale." He stopped. Ruth walked across the street toward him. She stopped 6 feet away, close enough that no one passing would think anything of it. "Thomas Calloway was my father," she said quietly. "You sent a man to his house. He died 11 days later." Victor Hale's face arranged itself into something like regret. "I'm not here to argue about legal rights," Ruth said. "I'm here because you need to understand something. Cord Dillman understood it eventually, and I want you to have more time with it than he did. What happened to my father was a choice. You made it. Every step was a choice you made. I want you to know that I know that. And I want you to know that I will be the consequence of those choices for as long as it takes. The bank can foreclose on the land. I won't be there to stop it. But the land is the only thing you're going to get." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she walked away. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's it? He's still alive?" Let me finish. What Ruth did instead of pulling that trigger was talk. Not asking for help, but talking like a woman who knew exactly where the structure was hollow. She went to every farmer in Grayfield County with a loan at the Merchants Bank. She sat at kitchen tables and listened to men who had been too afraid or too alone to say what they'd seen. She wrote everything down. She rode to Dodge City twice to meet with lawyers. She found a territorial judge in June, passing through on the circuit. She sat across from him for 90 minutes and did not leave until he had agreed to open an inquiry. She was 26 years old. She had buried her father 4 months earlier. She did not stop. The bank was investigated in August. Victor Hale resigned in September. The charges filed in October used language that was careful and legal and said between every line exactly what Ruth Calloway had said on those church steps in March. He was convicted in the spring of 1874. He served 4 years. The Calloway land was returned. Not to Ruth, because Ruth had never filed to keep it. But the debt that had been the instrument of her father's death was struck from the record by the court as fraudulently constructed. Thomas Calloway's name was cleared. It was the only justice available. Ruth decided it was enough. She didn't go back to the land. There was nothing there for her now. Some places are too full of someone else to live in after they're gone. She rode west instead, moving the way a woman moves when she's finished one thing and hasn't decided yet. On the 4th day of riding west, she came over a rise and saw a farmhouse in the valley below. 3 horses tied outside. Smoke from the chimney that wasn't the smoke of a cooking fire. She stopped on the rise and watched. A man came out of the farmhouse door. An old man appeared in the doorway behind them. She could see that he was holding his arm in a way that meant the arm had been recently introduced to something it hadn't agreed to. Ruth Calloway sat on her horse for a long moment. She thought about a kitchen floor in February. Then she reached down and checked that the Colt was loose in the holster. It was. She put her horse forward down the rise. Thomas Calloway spent 4 years in a war that was supposed to mean something. Came home to a piece of land and a daughter, and tried to build something. He never got to see what his daughter became. I think he would have recognized her, the way she moved, the way she calculated, the way she didn't run from hard things. He would have recognized all of it, because he put it there, one October afternoon at a time. Standing behind her in a field with his soldier's patience, watching her put 3 rounds in a grouping the size of a man's fist at 40 yards. "Good," he'd said. "Don't ever let anybody tell you that's not a lady's skill." She never did. She's still out there, riding west, the Colt on her hip. The folded piece of paper long since gone. Both names settled, one way or another. But paper has a way of finding new names. And if that farmhouse in the valley means what I think it means, Ruth Calloway isn't done yet.